In a stunning and unexpected development, the small Eastern European nation of Belarus has been thrust into chaos. Reports are flooding in that several top military generals have turned against President Alexander Lukashenko, the man who has ruled the country with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades. What began as rumors of discontent inside the army has now exploded into what many analysts are calling the most serious political crisis in Belarusian history. As dawn broke over the capital city of Minsk, citizens woke to the sound of armored vehicles rumbling through the streets. Eyewitnesses reported military convoys heading toward government buildings, communication hubs, and the presidential palace. Within hours, power appeared to shift. State television briefly went offline before reappearing with a group of stern-faced officers in full uniform. One of them, identified as General Viktor Malenkov, read a statement announcing that the armed forces of Belarus had taken control of the government to preserve national integrity, prevent foreign domination, and restore democracy to the Belarusian people. The generals accused Lukashenko of betraying his own nation by allowing Belarus to become overly dependent on Moscow, compromising its independence in exchange for Russian protection. They claimed that under Lukashenko's leadership, Belarus had turned into a vassal state, a pawn on the chessboard of another empire. Their message was broadcast across all major channels before being cut again by loyalist forces. Moments later, Lukashenko himself appeared on national television, surrounded by heavily armed security guards. Looking visibly shaken but defiant, he declared the coup attempt an act of treason. "I will not allow Belarus to be torn apart by traitors and foreign agents," he said, pounding the table in anger. "Those generals who have turned their weapons against the people will be punished. They have betrayed the motherland for money and lies." The president's fiery statement did little to calm the situation. Across Minsk, gunfire was reported near the defense ministry and the main government complex. Unconfirmed footage circulating on social media showed plumes of smoke rising from the outskirts of the capital. Civilians rushed to withdraw cash, stock up on food, and shelter indoors as the country plunged into uncertainty. For decades, Lukashenko has been known as Europe's last dictator. Since taking power in 1994, he maintained control through a combination of populism, fear, and loyalty from the security apparatus. However, years of economic stagnation, international sanctions, and deepening dependence on Russia have eroded his support, even within his once loyal army. Sources inside the Belarusian military suggest that discontent has been growing since 2022, when Lukashenko allowed Russian forces to use Belarusian territory as a launch pad for operations in Ukraine. Many officers reportedly saw this as humiliating, a betrayal of Belarus's neutrality and sovereignty. The generals leading the coup are said to be nationalists who believe Belarus should chart its own course, separate from Moscow's shadow. In a dramatic scene aired by several independent media outlets before being taken offline, the coup leaders appeared inside the presidential security headquarters, flanked by soldiers carrying the historic red and white Belarusian flag, the symbol of the pro-democracy movement. "We are not against the people," one of the officers declared. "We are the people. Our mission is to free our homeland from tyranny." The announcement immediately set off waves of emotion across the country. In Minsk, thousands of citizens poured into Independence Square, waving flags and chanting slogans, demanding Lukashenko's resignation. Some hugged soldiers and thanked them for finally standing with the people. Others remained fearful, remembering the brutal crackdowns of past years when security forces had crushed protests. With tear gas, rubber bullets, and mass arrests. Internationally, the reaction was swift. Moscow expressed deep concern, calling the coup a dangerous and unlawful power grab. The Kremlin warned that any harm to Lukashenko or the Belarusian state would be treated as a threat to Russian security. According to sources, Russian forces along the Belarusian border have been placed on high alert. Unconfirmed intelligence reports indicate that Moscow might be preparing to intervene, potentially sending peacekeeping units to restore order. Meanwhile, NATO and the European Union held emergency meetings. EU leaders urged restraint and called on all parties to respect international law and avoid bloodshed. Washington released a statement saying the United States was closely monitoring developments and emphasizing support for the Belarusian people's right to choose their own government. As the day progressed, control of the capital seemed divided. Loyalist forces retained the presidential palace and state media headquarters, while coup units controlled military bases and several key ministries. Skirmishes were reported in the industrial outskirts of Minsk, where armored units exchanged fire. At least 20 soldiers are believed to have been killed in the initial clashes, though official numbers remain uncertain. Communications across the country were severely disrupted. Internet networks went down, mobile signals became unreliable, and major roads were blocked by checkpoints. The airport was reportedly seized by forces loyal to the generals to prevent Lukashenko or his family from fleeing the country. Still, some reports claim that the president was secretly escorted to an undisclosed location, possibly near the Russian border. In neighboring countries, the shock was palpable. Poland and Lithuania began reinforcing their borders, fearing a wave of refugees and possible Russian involvement. Ukrainian officials publicly stated that what happens in Belarus could reshape the balance of power in Eastern Europe. Analysts in Kyiv warned that if Moscow intervenes militarily, the conflict could spill over, intensifying the regional confrontation between Russia and the West. Inside Belarus, the atmosphere was tense but strangely hopeful for some. Opposition leaders in exile hailed the coup as a historic chance for freedom, while others warned that replacing one autocrat with a military regime could lead to even harsher repression. Late into the night, gunfire continued in several parts of Minsk. Footage posted online showed rebel soldiers taking control of a television tower and broadcasting patriotic songs from the Soviet era, followed by the national anthem. At the same time, Lukashenko's loyal units regrouped at the palace, preparing for a possible counteroffensive. Rumors circulated that Russian military advisors had already arrived in Minsk to help coordinate loyalist defenses. International journalists were largely banned from reporting inside the country, but underground networks managed to send short video clips and voice messages revealing a divided army and terrified citizens. "You can feel the fear," said one resident. "Nobody knows who is in charge anymore." By morning, the situation remained fluid. The generals leading the coup called themselves the Council for National Restoration and promised new elections within 6 months. They urged calm and vowed that no foreign forces will be allowed to interfere. Yet few believed their assurances. Analysts pointed out that most military coups, once successful, tend to consolidate power rather than restore democracy. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin chaired an Emergency Security Council meeting. According to Kremlin sources, Putin described the coup as an attack on Slavic unity and a Western plot to undermine Russia's regional allies. Russian state media began broadcasting continuous coverage, portraying the generals as traitors and terrorists, meanwhile ordinary. Belarusians remained caught in the middle. Some neighborhoods in Minsk were left without power or water, while banks and shops stayed closed. Panic buying spread rapidly. Long queues formed at ATMs as people tried to withdraw what little money they could before the economy collapsed. Western media outlets compared the unfolding crisis to the failed Soviet coup of 1991, noting eerie similarities: aging authoritarian leaders, ambitious generals, and a nation at a crossroads between dictatorship and democracy. As evening approached, reports suggested that loyalist forces had recaptured part of the defense ministry after a fierce firefight. Several rebel officers were said to have surrendered, while others retreated to unknown locations. Yet the overall situation remained dangerously unpredictable. Diplomatic sources hinted that secret negotiations were underway, possibly mediated by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, to avoid a full-scale civil war. But Lukashenko, known for his stubbornness, reportedly rejected any dialogue, declaring there will be no compromise with traitors. Belarus will stand firm. In the streets, uncertainty turned into exhaustion. People waited for news, listening to static-filled radios and scanning social media for updates. Parents kept their children indoors, and soldiers, both loyalist and rebel, patrolled intersections with tense faces and fingers on triggers. By the third day of the crisis, the situation had reached a boiling point. International sanctions loomed, the economy teetered, and foreign embassies began evacuating staff. The United Nations called for immediate cessation of hostilities, warning that Belarus was on the brink of humanitarian disaster. As one analyst put it on BBC World News, we are witnessing the most dangerous moment in Belarus's modern history. Whether Lukashenko survives or falls, the country will never be the same again. Inside a darkened command bunker, the generals met, once more to plan their next steps. One officer reportedly said, "We didn't start this for power. We started this for Belarus." But even among them, doubts were beginning to grow. Could they really govern a nation fractured by fear, economic hardship, and external pressure? In Moscow, Putin made his move. Russian paratroopers were spotted near the border under the guise of training exercises. The message was unmistakable. Russia would not allow a friendly regime to collapse. Satellite images confirmed troop movements and aircraft on standby. The West condemned the buildup, but there was little appetite for direct confrontation. By now, the streets of Minsk were eerily quiet. Smoke still rose from burned-out vehicles, and citizens avoided speaking openly about politics. Some whispered that Lukashenko had escaped to a military base in the east. Others insisted he was still in the capital preparing a counterattack. Then, just as the world began to fear total war, a surprise statement emerged from the rebel council. "We call for a temporary ceasefire to prevent further bloodshed and open the path for negotiation." The announcement was met with cautious relief, but also skepticism. Would Lukashenko agree, or was it merely a pause before the next explosion? As midnight approached, Belarus remained a nation in limbo, suspended between dictatorship and democracy, loyalty and rebellion, freedom and fear. The outcome of this dramatic power struggle would not only decide the fate of Lukashenko's regime, but could reshape the entire balance of power in Eastern Europe. One thing, however, was clear to everyone watching around the globe: the age of Lukashenko's absolute rule had entered its final chapter. Whether he would fall to his own generals or rise again with Moscow's backing, history had already turned its page. Belarus, once quiet, obedient, and overlooked, now stood at the center of the world's attention, a nation trembling on the edge of transformation.